Okay, everybody, so we left off last time where we had written our we'd opened the data file that we want to look at, which is our first thing. We wrote our regular expression and tested that it was, the grammar was correct on it, the syntax was correct. And now we need to get to this part where we want to read in line by line and test whether the value in the grade column has fancy in it. So to do this, we're going to take a next step. So I'm going to actually go ahead and improve on this by commenting and saying, this is where I read in my original data file. So now the next thing that I have to do is what I want to say is basically for every for every line, every row in my data set, find the grade column and then apply my regex test to that value, right? Well, so the first thing I need to do is I need to get at each row in my data set. And so how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to use a pretty direct English syntax. I'm going to say for. Now, here's the thing that I need to remember, right? I could just say for row in original file, right? I could just say for every row in my file, right? Print row. Let's just give that a shot for now. See what happens. So if that works okay, hopefully I will get, oh, yep, there's my data file. Looks pretty good, right? Not very long, but pretty good. So, okay, I'm reading in my row correctly, I'm reading in my data correctly, and I can get it at each individual one. But, of course, the thing that I notice here, right, is that I don't actually have, my first row is actually kind of special, right? It's my header row. It doesn't have data values in it, it has headers in it. And so what I need is a way to make sure that I can distinguish that very first header row from all the other data rows. And the way that I can identify it, right, is of course that it is the first row. And so, but the thing is that my for row in original file doesn't actually tell me which row I'm on, right? It's going to print out the row no matter which row it is. So what I need to do is I need to keep track of which row I'm looking at. And in order to do this, what I'm going to say is, okay, well, I want row num, but in order to know what number row I'm on, I have to make sure that the program knows that I want to count my rows. And so in order to do that, I'm going to say enumerate. Enumerate, again, is a special built-in function. And of course, what does the word enumerate mean? It means number. Number these rows. So if I want to, I can now say print row num. I think I can put just a comma in here. Let's see what happens. Right? And this is the other thing I want you guys to get from this, is that you can be a little playful with this. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Take it out. Right? So let's see how this goes. Well, seemed to work okay. And there we are. Oh, that's interesting. So we see here actually that my very first row is actually row number 0. So this points out a very common feature of programming languages for whatever reason, which is that when they start counting, they always start with 0. So what I have now is I can get at each of my rows, and I know that my first row is called 0, or is technically number 0. So the thing that I want to keep an eye out for is that I want to do something different to my header row than I do to the rest of my data rows. And specifically what I want to do is I'm going to add my header there instead of test it for my value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, look. Now there's two things that I need to know. So I know that I'm looking at the grade column, but the question is, how do I get at the grade column? If this is a list, right, I have to figure out what position that grade column is in. Now, knowing this as I do now, that when computers start counting lists, they tend to start at 0, I can see that commodity name is going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So my grade column, I'm just going to make a note of this for myself. I'm going to say, hey, you know what? First row, first or header row, is actually row num 0. Secondly, grade column, or I can say grade, is actually in the sixth, well, what should I say? I was going to say is item number 6 in the row because the count starts at 0. All right, so now I've made a note of that to myself. I feel a little bit better. I kind of have a handle what's going on. So, you know, there's obviously a lot of different ways that we could approach this. The thing I'm going to do is I want to check for my 6th item. Now, here's the thing, is that when I just printed out the row like that, what I got was the entire row. But right now, the row is actually a string, right? So I know in my heart, I know that it's comma separated. And of course, what are things that are normally comma separated? Are lists. But right now, the data type is a string. And so similarly to the way we have to do, we have to apply a toNumber function, or we put quotes around a number when we want it to be viewed as a string, we have to kind of lean on the computer a little bit and say, look, I know you see that thing and you see it as a string that happens to have a bunch of commas in it, but once again, I'm cleverer than you are, and I know that it really can be interpreted as a list, right? There are separate positions in there that I need you to be able to get at. And so we're actually going to do the same thing here that we did for our file, for our rows, and we're going to say, look, I want you to, for every, for every value, well, first what I want you to do is I want you to convert this string into a list. And the way that I can force the computer to do that is I'm going to use something called a split function. So I'm going to call this row values. And row values is going to be my row, right? Whatever is in my row. And I'm going to say, look, I know this is comma delimited. I want you to split it on those commas. Here's the thing I want you to split it on. Okay? And that's going to split my, my row, which is currently a string, into an actual list, right? So a proper list that has indexes, or indices, sorry. Or item numbers if you want to think of it that way, right? And then what I want to do is I want to go through and I want to say, okay, look, now once again, I need to know what position, what row number, or sorry, what item number I'm on at any given moment. So I want to say for item num and value, right? The value is going to be whatever's in there. For item num and value in enumerate, right? In enumerate row values, right? So again, I've taken this list of row values and I'm putting on, sorry, I didn't say that before, right? I'm actually putting this, what are you complaining about? You're complaining about something. I'm going to say for item num value in enumerate row values, right? For every, I want you to split it into separate values and then give me the item number and the value. And for every one of those, I don't know, what shall I do? I'll just say print item num and value, right? Maybe I'll get rid of this print up here, right? I can just comment that out, right? Nice trick there. So what this should give me is it should give me a vertical list, basically, of the item number and the value in every row that I have. And so we're going to go ahead and run this on debug and see what happens. Oh, there we go. So if I read this correctly, what I see is, I can kind of stretch this out a little bit so it's not quite so tiny. Obviously on your own screens you can make it bigger. What I see is, oh, okay, this is actually really handy. And if I wanted to check, right, I can see that grade is in position 6. It's item number 6. So now that I've identified which column the grade column is, what item number it's at, right, it's at item number 6. Okay, I can take that and say, okay, well, I have a test that I want to apply to that. So I want to say if item num equals 6. Now, why do I use the double equals? Well, this is just the way that the computer distinguishes between what we're doing up here, where we say, hey, create the variable original file and dump all the contents of this this file opening and read lines action, right? This is what we're doing to it. and we're going to put that all, we're going to give that the name of original file. Very similar to how we talked about your team names, right? Where you picked a team name and then that referred to everybody who was on that team. That's what we call assignment, right? Name points to this group of things that we've decided to point it to. That's different from saying, you know, are these two things the same? And the way that we distinguish between that active assignment versus this comparison is by using an equals equals sign. Double equals is how we do that. And so then I'm going to put in this colon, and I'm going to say, hey, listen, if the item number is 6, then what do I want to do? Well, I want to test and see if it's fancy, right? If it's fancy or not. So I'm going to say is fancy match value. Okay, so this is actually a very similar syntax to what we saw in Google Refine, except sort of reversed, right? Because our regular expression is coming first and our value is going in the parentheses, but again, you can see a very similar structure. So what I want to say is if it's 6, then I want to say if is fancy matches value. In other words, if my value has fancy in it, then I want to say print true, right? I'm going to put true as a string, else print false. Now, what is this actually going to give me if I run it this way? Well, what it's going to give me is a bunch of trues and falses, but it's going to be pretty hard for me to tell if the correct thing is coming out. So what I really want to print is I want to print the value and whether it's true or false, right? So I can then eyeball the value and say, yeah, you know what, that looks correct, or looks like there's a mistake in there. So tricky thing going on here, I have two strings, the value, and this true and false string. We call this overloading, where that plus symbol actually can be used to quote unquote add things together, add strings together. This is also referred to as concatenation, and in fact, if you go to your spreadsheet software, you'll see that there's a function called concatenate that does this kind of string quote unquote addition. So let's see how that does. Oh, all right, so starting to look pretty good. Let's see, we got trues, we got a lot of trues. Ah, good. So now we see that we've actually successfully, we're going through row by row. Okay, we've discovered that grade is actually item number 6 in the row because the counter begins at 0. We've split the string that is our row contents into a genuine list. It looks like a list, but we have to force the computer to actually make it into a list by using this split function. And then we're going to go through each value in that new list of items, and we're going to look only at the 6th one because that's the only one that we need to, that according to our task here, that we actually need to look at. We only need to look at the grade column. And now we've applied our test, our is fancy regular expression, and we've found that indeed we can print out the value and true or false, and that seems to be matching correctly. So the next set of steps is going to be to actually make sure that we're adding that new column, right, and probably taking care of something regarding the header row. And then of course we have to output the completed file. So meet you back here in a couple of minutes and we'll get going on that.